lost science and technology in ancient Indian epics, decoding the Vedic system of knowledge. The Vedas are among the oldest collections of text in India. Even today, they are taught orally from instructor to student. The teacher painstakingly corrects the pronunciation and intonation of the Vedic texts. Technology has seen virtual classrooms where females also learn and recite the Vedas the way they were changed. Of the three later Vedas, the Samaveda is much the most intricately connected with the Rig Veda. Historically, it is of vast importance, for it contains lost technology and scientific matter, all its verses, except 75, being taken directly from the Rig Veda. Its contents are derived chiefly from the 8th and especially the 9th, the Soma book. The Samaveda resembles the Yajurveda in having been compiled only for ritual application, for the verses of which it consists are all meant to be chanted at the ceremonies of the offerings. Removed from their context in the Rig Veda, they are strung together without internal connection, their significance depending solely on their relation to particular rites. In form, these stanzas appear in the text of the Samaveda as if they were to be spoken or recited, differing from those of the Rig Veda only in the way of marking the accent. Over the centuries, voluminous literature has accumulated on the Vedas, written in English and many other languages. The Vedas remain elusive as they are written in a symbolic language that lends over one meaning. None of the three great acharyas, Shankara, Ramanuj, and Madhva, who explored every other ancient Indian source book, wrote full commentaries on Vedas. This is significant and adds further mystery to the enigmatic Vedas. Sri Madhva wrote a short Rig Vyasya, but it addresses only some parts of Rig Veda, unlike his voluminous commentaries on Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutras, and the Mahapuranas. The main commentary on the Vedas, which most Eastern and Western writers rely upon, is Sayana Madhava, popularly known as Sayanacharya. This voluminous work is appreciated worldwide for its encyclopedic coverage of Vedic texts. It is essentially a literal translation of the Vedas. Its critics lament its lack of reference to the hidden meanings of the Vedic tenets and its silence on the symbolism of the Vedas. This is one reason why the Vedas remain inadequately illuminated. Another reason is that the Vedic Sanskrit differs from classical Sanskrit, the language currently taught, written, and sometimes spoken. It is the mother of the current version of the language, and the mother of a widespread group of languages, the Proto-Indo-European languages. The Sama Veda is only the book of words employed by the particular class of Ugatri priests who preserved lost knowledge. Its stanzas assume their moral character of musical samans or chants only in the various songbooks called ganas, which show the prolongation, repetition, and interpolation of syllables necessary in singing done in European publications when the words are given below the musical notation. There are 4 songbooks in existence, 2 belonging to each division of the Veda. The number of samans here, given of course, admitted to being indefinitely increased, as each verse could be sung to many melodies. The Sama Veda comprises 1,549 stanzas, distributed in 2 books called archikas, or collections of rich verses. The principle of arrangement in these 2 books is different. The first is divided into 6 lessons, prapathaka, each containing 10 decades, dashat, of stanzas, except the 6th, which has only 9. The verses of the first 12 decades are addressed to Agni, those of the last 11 to Soma, while those of the intermediate 36 are chiefly invocations of Indra, the great Soma drinker. The second book contains 9 lessons, divided into 2 or sometimes 3 sections. It comprises small groups of stanzas which are closely connected, the first in the group being usually found in the first book. That the second book is both later in date and secondary is showed by its repeating stanzas from the first book, and it is deviating much less from the text of the Rig Veda. It is also a significant fact that the verses of the first book, which recur in the second, agree more closely with the readings of the Rig Veda than the other verses by which they are surrounded. This can only be accounted for by the position that they were consciously altered in order to accord with the same verses in the second book, which were directly influenced by the Rig Veda, while the readings of the first book had diverged more widely because that book had been handed down since the original borrowing by an independent tradition. Albert Einstein once said, "We owe a lot to the ancient Indians teaching us how to count, without which most modern scientific discoveries would have been impossible." The truth is, we lost a world of advanced science and technology with just the Hindu scriptures recanting the tales of that era. We know from statements of the Shatapatha Brahmana that the divisions of the first book of the Sama Veda existed at least as early as the period when the second part of that Brahmana was composed. There is, moreover, some reason to believe that the Sama Veda as a collection is older than at least the Taittiriya and the Vajrasaneyi recensions of the Yajur Veda. The latter contains verses also used as Saman chants in a form that shows the variations of the Sama Veda in contrast with the Rig Veda. This is even more striking as the Vajrasaneyi text has an undoubted tendency to adhere to the readings of the Rig Veda. The view expressed by Professor Nora Romney that many variants and verses of the Samaveda contained archaic forms as compared with the Rig Veda and were therefore borrowed at a time before the existing redaction of the Rig Veda took place is untenable. The various readings of the Samaveda are due partly to inferior tradition and in part to arbitrary alterations made to adapt verses detached from their context to the ritual purpose to which they were applied. The Vedas tell us of a time when we invented ceramic technology. The first ever mechanical device invented in this era was the wheel, and the potter was supposed to be the first engineer. The mechanism of the wheel is still used in lathes. In Veda, Kula, or potter, was compared with the creator of the universe. We came to know about burnt pots and other forms of clay materials in Indus Valley studies. The shapes were pear-shaped, conical, and cylindrical. Bricks were made of black and red clay, mica, sand, and limestones in this period. Even the pots were glazed and painted to make them attractive by using manganese for maroon shade, copper oxide for blue shade, and iron oxide for bluish-green shade. The chemicals used to control the surface were 25.2% iron oxide, 46.55% silicon dioxide, 15.53% aluminum oxide, and 4.74% calcium carbonate. Dwarka excavations have confirmed these took place recently. According to Kasyapa Samhita, it can be said that wooden molds are used to make bricks. The dimensions of the bricks were 11.72 inches by 5.25 inches by 7.5 inches, 11.55 inches by 7.75 inches, 10.5 inches by 5.5 inches by 7.5 inches. The steadiness of dimensions shows the accuracy level of the masterminds. Two schools of the Samaveda are known, the Kauthumas and the Ranayanias, the former of whom are said still to exist in Gujarat, while the latter, at one time settled mainly in the Maharashtra country, are said to survive in eastern Hyderabad. Their recensions of the text appear to have differed but little from each other. That of the Ranayanias has been published more than once. The earliest edition, brought out by a missionary named Stevenson in 1842, was entirely superseded by the valuable work of Benfey, which, containing a German translation and glossary besides the text, came out in 1848. The Samaveda was thus the first of the Vedas to be edited in its entirety. According to the recension of the same school, the text of this Veda, together with the commentary of Sayana, was subsequently edited in India. Of the Kauthuma recension, nothing has been preserved except the 7th Prapataka, which, in the Nigea subdivision of this school, forms an addition to the first Archaka and is edited in 1868. Two indices of the deities and composers of the Samaveda, according to the Nigea school, have also been preserved and indirectly supply information about the text of the Kauthuma recension. It was as far back as the 1860s that the vast knowledge of Vedic science was known. Vedic scholars started discovering metallurgy and metal casting in the Vedas. From Surmyam, Suriramiva, we realize that metals like iron, copper, silver, and gold were known to the Vedic people. The technique of making alloys and preparation of mining were also known to them in the Atharvan period. Quintus Curtius appreciated the gold and other metal alloys which were given to Alexander by Purava. Pliny and Herodotus talked about the superior quality of iron and steel products in India. Romans used to import Indian metal to make weapons, shields, and other military types of equipment during the Vedic period. Archaeological excavations have confirmed the usage of irons in Delhi, Taxila, Odisha, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh, where large numbers of bars, spikes, tongues, chisels, anvils were found. From the early Vedic time, the developments of metal casting were traced. In Rig Veda, some types of equipment used for casting are mentioned, like Damatri, cupola, bastri, blower, tatau, sieves, sherpa, trays, garma ayanmaya, crucible. In the Rig Vedic period, copper, iron, gold, and silver were used for metal casting. Many goddesses were found in South India made in the Vedic period by the metal casting process. The accuracy and precision of this process were controlled by the laws laid down by Visva, Karma, Maya, Visvarupa. The Yajurveda introduces us to a geographical area different from Rig Veda and a new epoch of religious and social life in India. The center of Vedic civilization is now found to lie farther to the east. We hear no more of the Indus and its tributaries, for the geographical data of all the recensions of the Yajurveda point to the territory in the middle of northern India, occupied by the neighboring peoples of the Kurus and Panchalas. The country of the former, called Kurukshetra, is precisely the holy land of the Yajurveda and the Brahmanas attached to them. It lay in the plain between the Satluj and the Yamuna, beginning with the tract bounded by the two small rivers, Drishadwati and Saraswati, extending southeastwards to the Yamuna. Kurukshetra was the country in which the Brahmanical religions and social system were developed, and from which it spread over the rest of India. It corresponds to the modern district of Surind, intricately connected with and eastward of this region, has situated the land of the Panchalas, which, running southeast from the Meerut district to Allahabad, embraces the territory between the Yamuna and the Ganges, called the Dawab, two waters. It claims a further historical interest as being in later times the scene of the conflict described in the Mahabharata between the Panchalas and Matsyas on the one hand, and the Kurus, including the ancient Bharatas, on the other. In the famous law book of Manu, the land of the Kurus is still regarded with veneration as the unique home of Brahmanism and is designated Brahmvarta. together with the country of the Panchalas and that of their neighbors to the south of the Yamuna, the Matsyas, with Mathura, now Mutra, as their capital, and the Surasenas. It is spoken of as the land of the Brahmin sages, where the bravest warriors and the most pious priests live, and the customs and usages of which are authoritative. Here, the adherents of the Yajurveda split up into several schools, which gradually spread over other parts of India, the Kathas with their subdivision, the Kapisthalas, being in the time of the Greeks in the Punjab, and later in Kashmir as well. The Kathas are now to be found in Kashmir only, while the Kapisthalas have entirely disappeared. The Maitrayanias, originally called Kalapas, appear at one time to have occupied the region around the lower course of the Narmada for a distance of some 200 miles from the sea, extending to the south of its mouth more than 100 miles, as far as Nasik, and northwards beyond the modern city of Baroda. There are now only a few remnants of this school to the north of the Narmada in Gujarat, chiefly at Ahmedabad and farther west at Morvi. Before the beginning of our era, these two old schools must have been widely diffused in India. Patanjali speaks of the Kathas and Kalapas as the universally known schools of the Yajurveda, whose doctrines were proclaimed in every village for the grammarian. It is now widely assumed that this was a metallurgy school who possessed a vast knowledge of material science, as seen from the following terminology extracted from the Vedas. Many terms can be found in the Panchabhuta and Sudha, like Gurutva, gravity, Dravatva, fluidity, Snigdhatva, viscosity, Sthistipakatva, elasticity, Samyoga, Viyoga, conjunction and disjunction, Pluakava, springing capacity, Vakurbvanam, refraction or bending, Virpam, deformation, Draganam, tension, Pranam, compression. This shows the knowledge about the material properties. They knew about the prevention technique of rusting and corrosion. Forging was termed as Ayohara, the renowned blacksmith Tatwa, was recognized as a god of offering. Agriculture and military types of equipment were made by forging, as there were an anvil, hammer, and tongues. Hot working and cold working techniques were there, and it is confirmed by the metallographic testing done in Harappa. Plastic deformation, annealing, and grain growth were observed in Indus metal pieces. From the Ramayana, moreover, we learn that these two schools were highly honored in Ayodhya or Oudh as well. They were, however, gradually ousted by the two younger schools of the Yajurveda. Of these, the Taitiriyas have been found only to the south of the Narmada, where they can be traced as far back as the 4th century AD. Their most crucial subdivision, that of the Apastambas, still survives in the territory of the Godavari, while another, the Hiranyakeshis, are found still farther south. The school of the Vajasanayans spread towards the southeast down the Ganges Valley. At the present day, they occupy a wide area embracing northeast and central India. Each of these 4 schools has preserved one or two recensions of the Yajurveda, the text of the Maitrayani Samhita, which comprises 4 books, Khanda, subdivided into 54 lessons, Prapathaka, has been edited by Professor L.V. Schroeder, 1881 to 1886. The same scholar is preparing an edition of the Kathaka Samhita, the recension of the Katha school. These 2 recensions are nearly related in language, having many forms in common which are not found elsewhere. Of the Kapisthala Katha Samhita, only somewhat corrupt fragments have hitherto come to light, and it is very doubtful whether sufficient manuscript material will ever be discovered to render an edition of this text possible. The Taittiriya Samhita, which comprises 7 books and is subdivided into 44 lessons, is later than the previously mentioned. It was edited by Professor A. Weber from 1871 to 1872. These texts of the Yajurveda form a closely related group, for they are essentially the same. They often agree, even verbally, especially in the verses and formulas for recitation which they contain. They also agree to arrange their matter according to a similar principle, which differs from that of the Vajrayana recension. Aerodynamics is another central yet controversial theme that comes up from these ancient Vedic schools. Very few people know about Tritala, Jalayan, Kara, Vayuratha, and Vidyutratha mentioned in Rig Veda. This signifies the knowledge of aerodynamics in that era, which is way before the Wright brothers' invention. CFD analysis is being done on the designs of the Vimana Shastra, and the abilities and structural rigidity are being investigated to see the depth of the knowledge in that period. After exploring the Vimana Shastra slokas, it has been analyzed that eco-friendly manufacturing, defense system, propulsion, and space travel theories were explained well in these slokas. ISRO and DRDO are working on making the prototypes of the aircraft designs for testing in Vimana Shastra by giving importance to reverse engineering. It has also been observed that there showed the metals by which Vians, aircraft, were made. An alloy of Sumaka, Sundalika, and Mortwikalohas was used to making an aircraft's structure. Few technical terms were there in Vimana Shastra, which can be evidenced regarding the pursuit of aerodynamics studies in the Vedic age, like Dhyana, coming down, Udayana, flying above, Sundna, hitting the target with high speed, Kinda, raising suddenly, Vyinda, coming down quickly, Kirpastika, flying still, Kilaka, gear mechanism and other handles of levers, Oamaka, Yantrika, drying machine, Varanala, air duct, Jalavarana, Nala, cooling water, circulating circuit, Tailapatra, oil tank, Vitapasaka Tantranala, air filter or air fuel mixer, Agnisthana, engine, Vidyut Yantra, batteries, Vada Kadana Yantra, propellers, Disaprako Daka Yantra, steering wheel type direction changer, Surya Saktya, Kursana Darpana, and Suramani, solar mirror and solar cell. Dhumanirga Manala, exhaust outlet. The Samhita of the latter consists entirely of the verses and formulas to be recited at the highest level and is therefore clear, Shukla, separated from the descriptive matter which is collected in the Brahmana. Hence, it is called the white, Shukla Yajurveda, while the others, under the general name of Krishna Yajurveda, are contrasted with it as containing both kinds of matter mixed up in the Samhita. The text of the Vajrasanayans has been preserved in two recensions, that of the Madhya Medinas and the Kanvas. These are almost identical in their subject and their arrangement. Their divergencies hardly go beyond reading varieties which appear only in their prose formulas, not in their verses. Agreeing thus closely, they cannot be separated in their origin by any wide interval of time. Their discrepancies probably arose, instead, from geographical separation, since each has its peculiarities of spelling. Most of the Rig Veda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda is about the relationship between the various forms of existence and sound, converting the existence into a sound form to reverberate within yourself by uttering certain sounds. By having mastery over the sound, you also have mastery over the form. This is the science of mantras, which has unfortunately fallen into appalling misuse and misinterpretation. These sciences are subjective. They cannot be studied by going to a college. Because of this subjective quality, all kinds of misinterpretation and misuse have entered this to such a point of ridiculousness that now the whole thing is being wiped out as some mumbo-jumbo. It needs a profound sense of involvement and dedication. You have to wear your life out for it. Otherwise, it does not yield to you. It does not yield to you because you want to get a qualification or seek it as a profession. Those mantras relating to ceremonies dealt with in previous chapters and requiring to apply to those ceremonies shows their supplementary character. The following research is concerned with new ceremonies such as the human offerings, the universal concept, and the offering to the mains. Moreover, different parts of the Samhita furnish some data pointing to different spiritual and social development periods. In the 16th chapter, many epithets describe the god Rudra, which is subsequently peculiar to Shiva. Two, however, which are significant, Ekana, ruler, and Mahadeva, great god, are absent here, but are added in the 39th chapter. These, as indicating special worship of God, represent a later development. Again, this specifies most Indian mixed castes, while it mentions only a few of them. Hence, it is likely that at least some which are known to the former chapter did not as yet exist when the latter was composed. On these grounds, 4 chronological strata may be distinguished in the Yajurveda. The following 7 must first have been added to the fundamental portion comprising chapters 1 to 18, for these 2 parts deal with the general sacrificial ceremonial. The development of the ritual led to the compilation of the following 14 chapters, which are concerned with ceremonies already treated, 26 to 29, or entirely new, 30 to 39. The last chapter dates from a period when the excessive growth of ritual practices led to a reaction. It does not supply sacrificial mantras, but aims at establishing a means between exclusive devotion to and total neglect of the sacrificial ceremonies. For the systematic and orderly distribution of matter by which the mantras are collected in the Samhita, while their dogmatic explanation is entirely relegated to a Brahmana, it can hardly be as old as the confused arrangement parts are primarily mixed up. The two most important portions of the Yajurveda deal with the new and complete moon offerings and the Soma offering on the one hand, and with the construction of the fire altar on the other. Chapters 1 to 10 of the White Yajurveda contain the mantras for the former, chapters 11 to 18 for the latter part of the ceremonial. The corresponding ritual explanations are found in books 1 to 5 and 6 to 9, respectively, of the Shatapatha Brahmana. In these fundamental portions, even the Black Yajurveda does not intermingle the mantras with their explanations. The first book of the Taittiriya Samhita contains in its first 4 lessons nothing but the verses and formulas recited at the fortnightly and the Soma offerings. The fourth book, nothing but those employed in the fire altar ritual. These books follow the same order and furnish a parallel recension of the corresponding parts of the Vajrayana Samhita. The Taittiriya Samhita contains within itself, but in a distinct part, the 2 corresponding Brahmanas, which on the whole are free from admixture with mantras. The 5th book is the Brahmana of the fire ritual, and the 6th is that of the Soma offering. But the dogmatic explanation of the new and complete moon offering is altogether omitted here, is found in the 3rd book of the Taittiriya Brahmana. In the Maitrayani Samhita, the distribution of the corresponding material is similar. The first 3 lessons of the first book contain the mantras only for the fortnightly and the Soma offerings. The latter half of the second book, lessons 7 to 13, the mantras only for the fire ritual. The corresponding Brahmanas begin with the 6th and the first lesson, respectively, of the 3rd book. It is only in the additions to these fundamental parts of the Black Yajurveda that the separation of mantra and Brahmana is not carried out. The significant difference between the black and the white consists of the former combining within the same collection Brahmana as well as mantra matter. As to its chief and fundamental parts, there is no reason to suppose that these 2 kinds of matter, which are kept separate and unmixed, are chronologically or essentially more nearly related than are the Vajrayana Samhita and the Shatapatha Brahmana. From these Brahmanas and their number systems, we fully understand their mathematical thinking. Present mathematics owes it to ancient Indian scholars for developing the skill of counting. Trading of materials and ideas was a prevalent activity between ancient India and ancient Greece, and hence, there are many records of the exchange of mathematical ideas between the 2 civilizations. Even though Greece is credited with contributing some opinions on the concept of zero, the world of math was revolutionized by ancient Indians in 500 CE. In the long list of surprising Indian inventions, the astronomer Aryabhata is consistently cited for first using the expression ka for zero in his numbering system. Through him, zero had finally gained a positional value. Its purpose now shifted from being a mere named concept to becoming a number in its own right. 100 years later, you see another scientific genius, Brahmagupta, employing the word sunya, empty, widely used in present-day India to denote zero. Various synonyms such as akasa, sky, are used in later years, connoting to the idea of an empty circle and imagining the concept of zero in different forms apart from simply tallying numbers. This is how the concept of zero transformed from an adjective to a noun, correct number. One important thing to remember is that zero was not conceived for computation, instead of as a part of a system used for storing numbers. The notion was spread towards the Western lands by Arab traders. Indians and Greeks performed their computations on sandboards. Based on inscriptions found in these two ancient societies, there is much debate about which civilization should be credited for assigning the symbol O to the concept of zero. The Yajur Veda resembles the Samaveda in having been compiled for application to sacrificial rites only. While the Samaveda deals solely with one part of the ritual, the Soma offering, the Yajur Veda supplies the formulas for the whole sacrificial ceremonial. Like the Samaveda, it is also connected with the Rig Veda. But while the former is practically altogether extracted from the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, though borrowing many of its verses from the same source, is essentially an original production. Thus somewhat, over 1/4 only, of the Vajrasena Samhita is derived from Rig Veda. 1/2 of this collection comprises verses, rich, most of which, upwards of 700, is found in the Rig Veda. The other half comprises prose formulas, yajus. The latter, as well as the verses not borrowed from the Rig Veda, are the independent creation of the composers of the Yajur Veda. It became impossible to obtain from the Rig Veda even approximately suitable verses for these novel requirements. This partial originality was indeed a necessary result of the growth of entire new ceremonies and the extraordinary development of ritual detail. The language of the mantra portion of the Yajur Veda, though distinctly representing a larger stage, yet on the whole agrees with that of the Rig Veda, while separated from that of classical Sanskrit by a considerable interval. Present in the language uses weights and measures, and more significantly, terminology for specific weights as a metrology system. The Indus Valley civilization is a developed and recently discovered ancient culture. The Harappan and the succeeding cultures of that time are credited with inventing many of the everyday things we use today, especially in measuring. For instance, the ruler and the weights. In the 1930s, 58 cubed weights were discovered at Chanhudaro, an archaeological site of the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan. The Indian inventions, dated 2400 to 1700 BCE, were made using the decimal and binary mathematical systems of measurement. The pieces discovered were multicolored, made of different sands, and came in different shapes and sizes. Metrologists estimate the stones were first shaped with a chisel and then stroked on smooth surfaces till the required mass amount was achieved. The Indus Valley people were careful in producing these weights. Over time and space, with a gap as wide as 7 centuries, the level and precision of the mass weight remained very accurate, with a margin of error of more or less than only 2%. Besides their mastery at handcrafting, the weight range establishes that the Indus people were also aware of using the powers of 10, the basis of the decimal system, and employed numbers of significant values in their computations. On its mythological side, the religion of the Yajur Veda does not differ essentially from that of the older Veda, for the pantheon is still the same. Some essential modifications are, however, apparent. The figure of Prajapati, only foreshadowed in the latest hymns of the Rig Veda, comes more and more into the foreground as the chief of the gods. The Rudra of the Rig Veda has appeared on the scene as Shiva, being several times mentioned by that name and by other epithets later peculiar to Shiva, such as Shankara and Mahadeva. Vishnu now occupies a somewhat more prominent position than in Rig Veda. An additional feature is his constant identification with the offering. The demons, now regularly called Asuras, perpetually appear as a group of evil beings opposed to the good gods. Their conflicts with the latter play a considerable part in the myths of the Yajur Veda. The Apsaras, who as a class of celestial nymphs endowed with all the seductive charms of female beauty, occupy so important a place in post-Vedic mythology, but are rarely mentioned in the Rig Veda, be more prominent in the Yajur Veda, in which many of them are referred to by individual names. Certain religious conceptions have, moreover, been changed and new rites introduced. Thus, the word Brahma, which in the Rig Veda meant simply devotion, signifies the essence of prayer and holiness, advancing towards its ultimate sense in the Upanishads. Again, snake worship, which is unknown to the Rig Veda, now appears as an element in Indian religion. However, what impresses the Yajur Veda with the stamp of a new epic is the character of the worship it represents. The relative importance of the gods and the offering in the older religion has now become inverted. In the Rig Veda, the object of devotion was the gods, for the power of bestowing benefits on humankind was believed to lie in their hands alone, while the offering was only a means of influencing their will in favor of the offered. In the Yajur Veda, the offering itself has become the center of thought and desire, its correct performance in every detail being all-important. Its power is now so great that it does not merely influence, but compels the gods to do the will of the officiating priest. Using it, the Brahmins may be said to hold the gods in their hands. The religion of the Yajur Veda may be described as a kind of mechanical sacerdotalism. A crowd of priests conducts a vast and complicated system of external ceremonies. Symbolical significance is attributed, and to the smallest minutiae of which the most significant weight is attached. In this stifling atmosphere of perpetual offering and ritual, the genuinely religious spirit of the Rig Veda could not possibly survive. Adoration of the power and beneficence of the gods, as well as the consciousness of guilt, is entirely lacking, every prayer being coupled with some rite and aiming solely at securing material advantages. As a natural result, the formulas of the Yajur Veda are full of dreary repetitions or variations of the same idea and bound with half or wholly unintelligible interjections, particularly the syllable Om. The following quotation from the Maitrayani Samhita is a good example. Thus, the ritual could not become more and more of a mystery to all who did not belong to the Brahman caste. To its formulas, no less than to the offering itself, control over nature and the supernatural powers is attributed. Thus, there are specific formulas for the obtainment of victory. Using this, it is said, Indra constantly vanquished the demons. Again, we learn that if the priest pronounces a formula for rain while mixing a specific offering, he causes the rain to stream down. Hence, the formulas are regarded as having a kind of magical effect by exercising compulsion. Similar miraculous powers later became attached to penance and asceticism among the Brahmins and holiness among Buddhists. The formulas of the Yajurveda have not the form of prayers addressed to the gods, but on the whole and characteristically comprise statements about the result of employing particular rites and mantras. Together with the corresponding ritual, they furnish a complex mass of appliances ready to hand to obtain material welfare and many unique objects, such as cattle or villages. The presence of a priest capable of using the forms correctly is, of course, always presupposed. The desires which several rites fulfill amount to nothing more than absurdity. Thus, some of them aim at the obtainment of the year. Formulas to secure possession of the moon would have had equal practical value. Hand in hand with the elaboration of the sacrificial ceremonial went the growth and consolidation of the caste system, in which the Brahmins secured the social and religious supremacy which has held India enchained for over 2,500 years. Not only do we find the four castes firmly established as the main divisions of Indian society in the Yajurveda, but, as one of the later books of the Vajrasana Samhita shows, most of the mixed castes known in later times are already found to exist. Therefore, the social and religious conditions of the Indian people now wear an aspect essentially differing from those revealed to us in the hymns of the Rig Veda. The Rig Sama and Yajurvedas alone were initially recognized as canonical collections, for they only were concerned with the tremendous sacrificial ceremonial. The Atharva Veda, except for the last book which was added to connect it with that ceremonial, is essentially unconnected. The ceremonial to which its hymns were practically applied is, with few exceptions, that the Grihya Sutras deals with the manufacturing of textiles. The jump from science to mythology and back to engineering is a running theme. Arguably, cotton is the most commercialized commodity in the world, with another achievement under its belt. In the long list of Indian inventions, the Indus Valley civilization had grown cotton way before anything else. While the ancient Greeks adorned goatskins and other animal hides as clothing, ancient Indians had cultivated cotton in the 5th and 4th millennium BCE. Greek philosopher Herodotus describes Indian cotton as a wool exceeding in beauty and goodness that of sheep. Other accounts describe Indian cotton to be woven in winds. The Arab merchants carried the notion of cotton cultivation to Greece and then Europe in 800 CE. The oldest cotton thread, dated to the Neolithic age, was found at Mehrgarh and Rakhigarhi. The Indian invention of cotton has been a part of its national identity for many centuries. The colonial desire for the trade of cotton fabrics was a driving factor behind British imperialism in 17th century India. Hence, the charkha, cotton spinning wheel, and khadi, plain cotton cloth, were symbolic of the struggles of the Indian independence movement in the mid-1900s. In its main contents, the Atharva Veda is more superstitious than the Rig Veda. It does not represent the more advanced religious beliefs of the priestly class, but is a collection of the most popular spells current among the masses, who always preserve more primitive notions concerning demoniac powers. The spirit that breathes in it are that of a prehistoric age. A few of its actual charms probably date with minor modification from the Indo-European period, for as Adalbert Kuhn has shown, some of its spells for curing bodily ailments agree in purpose and content, as well as to some extent, even in form, with Old German, Letic, and Russian charms. The higher religious ideas relating to the gods represent a more recent and advanced stage than the Rig Veda. It contains more theosophic matter than any of the other Samhitas. For the history of civilization, it is more exciting and vital than the Rig Veda itself. The Atharva Veda is extant in the recensions of two different schools. This recension is doubtless meant by the Paipalada mantras mentioned in one of the Parashishtas, or supplementary writings of the Atharva Veda. However, that of the Paipaladas is known in a single birch bark manuscript, which is ancient but inaccurate and mostly unaccented. It was discovered by Professor Buller in Kashmir and has been described by Professor Roth in his tract Der Atharva Veda in Kashmir, 1875. It will probably soon be accessible to scholars as a photographic reproduction published by Professor Bloomfield. Nearly the whole of Sayana's commentary to the Atharva Veda has been edited in India. The printed text, edited by Roth and Whitney in 1856, gives the recension of the Shaunaka school. Its chief interest lies in the large number of readings supplied by it, which differ from those of the printed edition of this Veda. This Samhita is divided into 20 books containing 730 hymns, about 6,000 stanzas. Some 1,200 of the latter are derived from the Rig Veda, chiefly from the 10th, 1st, and 8th books, and from each other. Of the 143 hymns of the book, all but 12 are taken bodily from the established text of the Rig Veda with no change. The matter borrowed from the Rig Veda in the other books shows considerable varieties of reading, but these, as in the other Samhitas, are of lesser value than the Rig Veda's text. As in the Yajur Veda, a considerable part of the Atharva, about 1/6, comprises prose. Upwards of 50 hymns, comprising the whole of the 15th and 16th, besides some 30 hymns scattered in the other books, are entirely unmetrical. Parts or single stanzas of over 100 other hymns are similar. That the Atharva Veda originally comprised its first 13 books only is shown both by its arrangement and by its subject. The contents of books 1 to 7 are distributed according to the number of stanzas in the hymns. The contents of all these 13 books are indiscriminately intermingled. The following books, on the contrary, are arranged according to the uniformity of the subject. Book 14 contains the stanzas relating to the wedding rite, consisting primarily of mantras from the 10th book of the Rig Veda. Book 15 is a glorification of the chief deity being under the name of Vratya and contains certain conjurations. The last two books are manifestly late additions. Book 19 comprises a mixture of supplementary pieces, part of the text of which is corrupt. Book 20, with a slight exception, contains only complete hymns addressed to Indra, borrowed directly and with no variation from the Rig Veda. That its readings are identical to those of the Rig Veda would alone show that it is a later date than the original books, the readings of which show considerable divergencies from those of the older Veda. There is, however, more convincing proof of the lateness of this book. Its matter relates to the Soma ritual and is entirely foreign to the spirit of the Atharva Veda. It was undoubtedly added to establish the claim of the Atharva to the position of a fourth Veda by bringing it into connection with the recognized sacrificial ceremonial of the three old Vedas. Again, this book and the 19th are not noticed in the Prati Shakyas of the Atharva Veda. Both of them must, therefore, have been added after that work was composed. Except for two prose pieces, 48 and 49, the only original part of Book 20 is the so-called Kuntapa hymns, 127 to 136. These are allied to the Dana stutis of the Rig Veda, those panegyrics of liberal kings or offerings who were the forerunners of epic narratives, praising warlike princes and heroes. Chess is considered a game for intellectually developed people. Among the ancient Indian Brahmin class, chess was a favored game and was considered a gift from the gods. Vishnu was even thought to have invented it. However, even in olden times, the model of Chaturanga, the four divisions, the most famous one out of the two premature Indian inventions of the board game, was played by the Indians. Robert Kaplan designates the time of development for the strategy game anywhere between 3000 BCE and 500 CE. The game reached Persia and Europe through the Arabs. This Indian invention of chess had 64 squares, and unlike its present counterpart, was played by 4 people instead of 2. Each player had 8 pieces, 4 pawns, king, bishop, knight, and rook. Alternatively, in place of 6-faced dice, an oblong one was used. In addition, the players facing each other were allied, and the two teams were formed based on the opposing directions of their seating positions. In a general understanding, chess is attributed to have first been mentioned in the Puranas, a collection of 18 religious texts in ancient Indian literature. Legend says that to amuse Ravana, the villain of the epic Ramayana, with imagery of warfare, his wife invented chess. Mahabharata, another Indian saga, recounts how the Pandava, brother Yudhishthira, lost his kingdom, estates, riches, and even his wife to the sly Shakuni in a dice game. The existence of the Atharva as a collection when the last books of the Shatapatha Brahmana, the Taittiriya Brahmana, and the Chnadogya Upanishad were composed is proved by the references to it in those works. In Patanjali's Mahabhashya, the Atharva had already attained to such an assured position that it is even cited at the head of the Vedas and occasionally as their only representative. The oldest name of this Veda is Atharvangirasa, a designation occurring in the text of the Atharva Veda and found at the beginning. This word is a compound formed of the names of two ancient families of priests, the Atharvans and Angirases. In the opinion of Professor Bloomfield, the former term is here synonymous with holy charms as referring to promising practices, while the latter is an equivalent of witchcraft charms. Though representing only its human side, the term Atharva and its derivatives would thus designate the fourth Veda as a whole. In its plural form, Atharvana, the word in this sense is found several times in the Brahmanas, but in the singular it seems first to occur in an Upanishad. The adjective Atharvana was first found as a neuter, plural, with the sense of Atharvan hymns in the Atharva Veda itself, expected from time onwards. The name Atharva Veda first appears in sutras about as early as Rig Veda, and similar designations to the other Samhitas, besides two other names of the Atharva Veda, the use of which is practically limited to the ritual texts of this Veda. In one of these, Bhrigu Angirasa, the name of another ancient family of fire priests, the Bhrigus, takes place in that of the Angirases. The other Brahma Veda has outside the Atharvan literature only been found once, and that in a Grihya Sutra of the Rig Veda. Dr. Ryan Murhan attributes the invention of yoga to Brahman's class. The term yoga has varied meanings in the Sanskrit lexicon, ranging from the noun chariot, 200 BCE to 400 CE, to the union of the body with God. In the 3rd century BCE, we see that the god of death compares the body and intellect to the rider and the chariot. And the next, Kathaka Upanishad, Nachiketa, the youngest brother of Pandavas, is made privy to the three foundations of yoga: the importance and physiology of the human body, the connection of the individual to the Supreme Being, the components of the mind and body. Buddhist and Jain schools of philosophical thought also embody the yogic theory in the later years. Between 300 BCE and 400 CE, the yogic theory had been immortalized into some core principles that influence our understanding of the concept in this day and age. It employed human philosophy, cognition, perception, divine and supernatural knowledge, and consciousness. Two stances on the modern, popularized practice of yoga stop it from being incorporated everywhere for the global good. On the one hand, the elitist, Christian yoga-phobic mentality and the listing of yoga amongst Indian inventions do not allow Christianity and Hinduism to intermingle with this notion. The idea of globalization in an interconnected world dies out as these groups resist the acceptance of cultural realities different from their own. A considerable time elapsed before the Atharva Veda, owing to the general character of its contents, attained to the rank of a canonical book. There is no evidence that even at the latest period of the Rig Veda, the charms making up the Atharva Veda were formally recognized as a separate literary category. The Rig Veda, though it is mainly concerned with praises of the gods in connection with the offering, contains hymns showing that sorcery was bound up with domestic practices from the earliest times in India. While mentioning the three Vedas by Rik, Saman, and Yajus, the Purusha hymn does not refer to the spells of the Atharva Veda. The only reference to the spells of the Atharva Veda as a class in the Yajur Veda is found in the Taittiriya Samhita, where they are alluded to under the name of Angirasa by the side of Rik, Saman, and Yajus, which it elsewhere mentions alone. The formulas of the Yajur Veda are often pervaded by the spirit of the Atharva Veda and are sometimes Atharvan, even in their wording. The difference between the Rig Veda and Yajur Veda on the one hand and the Atharva on the other, as regards sorcery, lies solely in the degree of its applicability and prominence. The Atharva Veda itself only once mentions its literary type directly as Atharvan Girasa, and once indirectly as Beshaya or auspicious spells by the side of the other three Vedas, while the latter in a considerable number of passages are referred to alone. This shows that there was no feeling of antagonism between the adherents of this Veda and those of the older ones. Turning to the Brahmanas, we find that those of the Rig Veda do not mention the Atharva Veda at all, while the Taittiriya Brahmana, like the Taittiriya Aranyaka, refers to it twice. In the Shatapatha Brahmana, it appears more frequently, occupying a more defined position, though not Veda. This work very often mentions the three old Vedas alone, either explicitly as Rik, Saman, Yajus, or as Trividya, the threefold knowledge. In several passages, they are also mentioned along with other literary types, such as Itihasa, story, Purana, ancient legend, Gatha, song, Sutra, and Upanishad. In these enumerations, the Atharva Veda regularly occupies the fourth place, coming immediately after the three Vedas, while the rest follow in varying order. The Upanishads treat the Atharva Veda similarly. The Upanishads of the Atharva itself, however, sometimes tacitly add its name after the three Vedas, even without mentioning other literary types. About the Shrauta, or sacrificial sutras, we find no reference to the Atharva in those of Katyayana, White Yajur Veda, or Latyayana, Samaveda, and only one of each in those of Shankayana and Ashwalayana, Rig Veda. There is no evidence of repugnance to the Atharva or exclusiveness towards it by followers of the other Vedas in all this sacrificial literature. Such an attitude could indeed hardly be expected, for though the sphere of the Vedic sacrificial ritual differed from that of traditional magical rites, it is impossible to draw a distinct line of demarcation between offering and sorcery in the Vedic religion, of which witchcraft is, in fact, an essential element. The adherents of the three sacrificial Vedas would thus naturally recognize a work that was a repository of witchcraft. Thus, the Shatapatha Brahmana, though characterizing Yadu, or sorcery, was devilish, doubtless, because it may be dangerous to those who practice it, places Yatu Vida, or sorcerers, by the side of Bhakvrichas, or men skilled in Rigvedic verses. Just as the Rig Veda contains very few hymns directly connected with the practice of sorcery, so the Atharva originally included only matters incidental and subsidiary to the sacrificial ritual. Thus, it contains a series of formulas that have no meaning except in connection with the three daily pressings, savana, of Soma. We also find it in hymns that comprise formulas of expiation for faults committed at the offering. Therefore, we conclude that the Atharva followers, to some extent, knew and practiced the sacrificial ceremonial before the conclusion of the present redaction of their hymns. However, the relation of the Atharva to the Shrauta rites was initially so slight that it became necessary to establish a direct connection with it and add the 20th book, which was compiled from the Rig Veda for the Hindu philosophy of which nearly all modern 19th century scientists and engineers revered. The properties of space have been postulated by many, from ancient Vedic philosophy, Eastern mystics, various ancient civilizations throughout human history, to Descartes, Einstein, Newton, and more. Humans are curious beings, and our quest to discover what is will never end. And they allowed Apollonius to ask questions, and he asked them of what they thought the cosmos was composed, but they replied of elements. Are there then 4, he asked. Not 4, said Larcas, but 5. And how can there be a 5th, said Apollonius. Alongside water and air and earth and fire, there is the ether, replied the other, which we must regard as the stuff of which gods are made. For just as all mortal creatures inhale the wire, so do immortal and divine natures inhale the ether. Am I, said Apollonius, to regard the universe as a living creature? Yes, said the other. The Life of Apollonius of Tyana, Philostratus, 220 AD. Science now knows that a material universe as the foundation of what we perceive to be our physical material world is not quite the case. Today, physicists recognize that physical atoms comprise vortices of energy that are constantly spinning and vibrating. At its most minor observable level, the matter is energy, and this energy that exists all around us can be tapped into and possibly used to generate power. Quantum physics has left many scientists baffled. Again, discovering that our physical material reality is not physical can be pretty confusing. Scientists explored the relationship between energy and the structure of matter at the turn of the 19th century. This is approximately the time when the idea of a Newtonian material universe was dropped from the heart of scientific knowledge and replaced, because the matter is nothing but an illusion, that everything in the universe is made of energy. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Everything we call real is made of things that cannot be real. Niels Bohr. Again, if you observed the composition of an atom with a microscope, you would see a small, invisible tornado-like vortex with several infinitely small energy vortices called quarks and photons. These are what make up the structure of the atom. As you focused closer and closer on the structure of the atom, you would see nothing. You would observe a physical void. The atom has no physical structure. We have no physical structure. Material things do not have any physical structure. Atoms are made of invisible energy, not matter. Despite the unrivaled empirical success of quantum theory, the very suggestion that it may be literally true as a description of nature is still greeted with cynicism, incomprehension, and even anger. T. Folger, Quantum Schmantum. Get over it and accept the inarguable conclusion: the universe is immaterial, mental, and spiritual. R.C. Henry, Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Johns Hopkins University. The conspicuous way in which Shravana works, Ignore the Atharva, is therefore, because of its being almost entirely unconnected with the subject of the offering, not to any pronounced disapproval or refusal to recognize its value in its sphere. With the Grihya, or domestic sutras, which contain many elements of sorcery practice, Vidhana, we should expect the Atharva to betray a closer connection. This is to some extent the case. for many verses quoted in these sutras are identical with or variants of those contained in the Atharva, even though the domestic, like the sacrificial, sutras endeavored to borrow their verses as far as possible from the particular Veda to which they were attached. Otherwise, however, their references to the Atharva betray no greater regard for it than those in the sacrificial sutras do. Such references to the fourth Veda are here, it is accurate, more frequent, and formulaic, but this appears to mean nothing more than the Grihya Sutras belong to a later date. In the sphere, too, of law, dharma, as dealing with widespread usage and custom, the practices of the Atharva maintained a specific place, for the indispensable sciences of medicine and astrology were distinctively Atharvan, and the king's domestic Shaplan, Purohita, believed capable of rendering excellent services in the injury and overthrow of enemies by sorcery, usually seems to have been an Atharvan priest. It is only natural that we should first meet with censures of the practices of the Atharva in the legal literature, because such practices were thought to enable one man to harm another. The verdict of the law treatises, on the whole, is that as incantations of various kinds are injurious, the Atharva Veda is inferior and its practices impure. This inferiority is directly expressed in the Dharma Sutra of Apastamba and the later legal treatise, Smriti, of Vishnu, classes the reciter of a deadly incantation from the Atharva among the 7 kinds of assassins. Physicians and astrologers are pronounced impure. Practices with roots are prohibited. Sorceries and imprecations are punished with severe penances. Sometimes, however, the Atharva Veda is stated to be helpful. Thus, the law book of Manu recommends it as the natural weapon of the Brahman against his enemies. In the Mahabharata, we find the importance and the canonical character of the Atharva fully recognized. The 4 Vedas are often mentioned, the gods Brahma and Vishnu being described as having created them in several passages. The Atharva is here often also referred to alone and spoken of with approbation. Its practices are well known and seldom criticized adversely, magic and sorcery being good. Finally, the Puranas not only regularly speak of the fourfold Veda, but assign to the Atharva the advanced position claimed by its ritual literature. Thus, the Vishnu Purana connects the Atharva with the 4th priest, the Brahman, of the sacrificial ritual. A particular prejudice has prevailed against the Atharva from the time of the Dharma Sutras. According to Burnell, this appears from the fact that even today, the most influential Brahmins of southern India still refuse to accept the authority of the 4th Veda and deny its genuineness. A similar conclusion may be drawn from occasional statements in classical texts, especially from the later Atharvan writings' efforts to vindicate the character of their Veda. These ritual texts never enumerate the Vedas without including the Atharva, but sometimes place it at the head of the 4 Vedas, under a sense of the exclusion of their Veda from the sphere of the sacrificial ritual. They lay claim to the 4th priest, the Brahman, who in Vedic religion was not attached to any of the 3 Vedas, but is required to know all 3 and of their sacrificial application, acted as superintendent or director of the sacrificial ceremonial. Ingeniously availing themselves of the fact that he was unconnected with any of the 3 Vedas, they put forward the claim of the 4th Veda as the particular sphere of the 4th priest. That priest, moreover, was the most important as possessing a universal knowledge of religious lore, Brahma, the comprehensive esoteric understanding of the gods, and the mystery of offering. Hence, the Kaupatha Brahmana exalts the Atharva as the highest religious lore, Brahma, and calls it the Brahma Veda. The claim to the latter designation was doubtless helped by the word Brahma, often occurring in the Atharva Veda itself with the sense of charm, and because the Veda contains a more considerable amount of theosophic matter, Brahma Vidya, than any other Samhita. The texts belonging to the other Vedas never suggest that the Atharva is the sphere of the fourth priest. Some Brahmana passages expressly declare that anyone equipped with the requisite knowledge may be a Brahman. The ritual texts of the Atharva further energetically urged that the Purohita, or domestic chaplain, should be a follower of the Atharva Veda. They appear to have finally succeeded in their claim to this office, doubtless because kings attached great value to exceptional knowledge of witchcraft. The geographical data in the Atharva are but few and furnish no specific evidence of the region in which its hymns were composed. One hymn of its older portion mentions the Gandharis, Mujavats, Mahavrishas, and Balikas in the northwest, and the Magadhas and Angas in the east. But they are referred to in such a way that no safe conclusions can be drawn as to the country in which the composer of the hymn in question lived. The Atharva also contains a few astronomical data, the lunar mansions enumerated in the 19th book. The names here given deviate considerably from those mentioned in the Taittiriya Samhita, mainly appearing in a later form. The passage in which this list is found is, however, a late addition. From a grammatical point of view, the language of the Atharva is decidedly later than that of the Rig Veda, but earlier than that of the Brahmanas. In vocabulary, it is chiefly remarkable for the large number of famous words it contains, and which, from a lack of opportunity, it does not appear elsewhere. Tesla and Ancient Vedic Philosophy and the Properties of Space. We have seen a fascinating trend, especially within the past decade, of modern-day science catching up to an ancient understanding of the true nature of reality, its makeup, how it functions, and how we can work with it to bring about change on our planet. For anybody to label the merging of spirituality and science as pseudoscience, they have not properly investigated it. Spiritual concepts of our ancient world are directly intertwined with modern-day science, more so quantum physics, and Nikola Tesla was well aware of this. All perceptible matter comes from a primary substance or tenuity beyond conception, filling all space, the akasha or luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana or creative force, calling into existence in never-ending cycles all things and phenomena. Nikola Tesla, Man's Greatest Achievement, 1907. As you can see, Tesla was aware of ancient concepts and their correlation with the science he was working on, using Sanskrit words like akasha and prana to describe the force and matter that exists all around us. These words come from the Upanishads, a collection of Vedic texts. The Akash is not destructible. It is the primordial absolute substratum that creates cosmic matter, and hence the properties of Akash are not found in the material properties that are in a sense relative. The Akash is the eternally existent, superfluid reality for which creation and destruction are inapplicable. Idam tadaksh araparam avyoman, paramavyoman. Paramahamsa Tewari, engineer, physicist, and inventor. Nikola Tesla had correlations with Swami Vivekananda, 1863 to 1902, who was one of the most famous and influential spiritual leaders of the philosophies of Vedanta, one of the 6 schools of Hindu philosophy. The term initially referred to the Upanishads, a collection of philosophical texts in Hinduism, and yoga. He was the chief disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and the founder of Ramakrishna Math and Ramakrishna Mission. He is a giant figure in the history of the Hindu reform movements. Vivekananda wrote a letter to Tesla in the late 1800s stating, "Mr. Tesla thinks he can demonstrate mathematically that force and matter are reducible to potential energy. I'm to go and see him next week to get his new mathematical demonstration. In that case, the Vedantic cosmology will be placed on the surest of foundations. I am working a good deal now upon the cosmology and eschatology of the Vedanta. I clearly see their perfect union with modern science, and the elucidation of the one will be followed by that of the other." Swami Vivekananda, Complete Works, Volume 5, 5th edition. After meeting with Swami, Tesla began using the Sanskrit words, and after studying the Eastern view of the true nature of reality about the mechanisms that drive the material world, eventually, it led him to the basis for the wireless transmissions of electrical power, known as the Tesla coil transformer. During this year, he made the following comments during a speech before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, given before he familiarized himself with the Vedic sincere of the eastern nations of India, Tibet, and Nepal. "Ere many generations pass, our machinery will be driven by a power obtainable at any point in the universe. This idea is not novel. We find it in the delightful myth of Antaeus, who derives power from the earth. We find it among subtle speculations of one of your splendid mathematicians. Throughout space there is energy. Is this energy static or kinetic? If static, our hopes are in vain. If kinetic, and this we know it is, for certain, then it is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature." Nikola Tesla. The Brahmanas, circa 800 to 500 BC. The period in which the poetry of the Vedic Samhitas arose was followed by one which produced a different literary type, the theological treatises called Brahmanas. It is characteristic of the form of these works that they are composed in prose, and of their matter that they deal with the sacrificial ceremonial. Their principal object is to explain the sacred significance of the ritual to those who are already familiar with the offering. Their descriptions are not exhaustive, much being stated only in outline or omitted altogether. They are ritual textbooks which aim to furnish a complete survey of the sacrificial ceremony to those who do not know it already. Their contents may be classified under the 3 heads of practical sacrificial directions, vidi, explanations, arthavada, exegetical, mythological, or polemical, and theological or philosophical speculations on things, Upanishad. Even those which have been preserved from quite an extensive literature by themselves, yet many others must have been lost, as appears from the many names of and quotations from Brahmanas unknown to us occurring in those which are extant. They reflect the spirit of an age in which all intellectual activity is concentrated on the offering, describing its ceremonies, discussing its value, speculating on its origin and significance. It is only reasonable to suppose that an epoch like this, which produced no other literary monuments, lasted for a considerable time. Though the Brahmanas are on the complete uniform in character, age differences are traceable in them. Next to the prose portions of the Yajurveda, the Panchavimsha and the Taittiriya are proved by their syntax and vocabulary to be the most archaic of the regular Brahmanas. This conclusion is confirmed because the latter is, and the former has been, accented. A more recent group is formed by the Jaiminiya, the Kaushitaki, and the Aitareya Brahmanas. The first of these is probably the oldest, while the third seems to be the latest, on linguistic grounds. The Shatapatha Brahmana, again, is posterior to these. It shows a distinct advance in the matter. Its use of the narrative tenses is later than that of the Aitareya, and its style is decidedly developed compared to all the Brahmanas, as mentioned earlier. Indeed, it is accepted, but in a way that differs entirely from the traditional Vedic method. Latest of all are the Gopatha Brahmana of the Atharva and the short Brahmanas of the Samaveda. In language, the Brahmanas are considerably more limited in using forms than the Rig Veda. However, the subjunctive is still employed, as well as a good many of the old infinitives. Their syntax represents the oldest Indian stage even better than the Rig Veda, chiefly, of course, owing to the restrictions imposed by meter on the latter style. The Brahmanas contain some metrical pieces, gathas, which differ from the prose in which they are embedded by certain peculiarities of their own and by a more archaic character. Allied to these is a remarkable poem of this period, the Supernadhyaya, an attempt, after the age of living Vedic poetry had ended, to compose in the style of the Vedic hymns. It contains many Vedic forms and is accented, but it betrays its true character by its many modern forms and many monstrosities because of unsuccessful imitation of the Vedic language. Further development is the Aranyakas, or forest treatises, the last age of which is showed both by the position they occupy at the end of the Brahmanas and by their theosophical character. These works are represented as meant for the use of pious men who have retired to the forest and no longer perform offerings. According to Professor Oldenburg, however, rather treatises that, owing to their content's superior mystic sanctity, were communicated to the pupil by his teacher in the forest's solitude instead of in the village. In tone and content, the Aranyakas form a transition to the Upanishads, which are embedded in them, or more usually form their concluding portion. The word Upanishad, literally sitting down beside, having first doubtless meant confidential session, came to signify secret or esoteric doctrine, because these works were taught to select pupils, probably towards the end of their apprenticeship, and lectures from which the wider circle was excluded. Being entirely devoted to theological and philosophical speculations on things, the Upanishads mark the last stage of development in Brahma literature. As they come at the end of the Brahmanas, they are also called Vedanta, end of the Veda, a term later interpreted to mean final goal of the Veda. Revelation, Shruti, was regarded as including them, while the sutras belonged to the sphere of tradition, Smriti. The subject of all the old Upanishads is essentially the same, the doctrine of the Atman, or Brahma, the Supreme Soul. The fundamental theme was expounded in various ways by the different Vedic schools, of which the Upanishads have initially been the dogmatic textbooks, just as the Brahmanas were their ritual textbooks. The Aranyakas and Upanishads represent a phase of language which, on the whole, closely approaches to classical Sanskrit. The oldest Upanishads occupying a position linguistically midway between the Brahmanas and the Sutras. Of the two Brahmanas attached to the Rig Veda is the Aitareya. The extant text comprises 40 chapters, adhyaya, divided into 8 books called Panchikas or Pentads, containing 5 chapters. That its last 10 chapters were a later addition appears likely both from internal evidence and from the fact that the closely related Shankayana Brahmana contains nothing corresponding to their subject matter, which is dealt with in the Shankyana Sutra. The last 3 books would further appear to have been composed later than the first 5, since the former is used as a narrative tense, while in the latter, it still has its original present force as in the oldest Brahmanas. The essential part of this, Brahmana, deals with the offerings. It treats first, 1 to 16, of the Soma rite called Agnishtoma, which lasts 1 day, then 17 to 18 of that called Gavamayana, which lasts 360 days, and thirdly, 19 to 24 of the Dwadashaha, or 12 days rite. The next part, 25 to 32, which is concerned with the Agnihotra, or fire offering, and other matters, has the character of a supplement. The last portion, 33 to 40, dealing with the ceremonies of the king's inauguration and his domestic priest's position, bears similar signs of lateness. The other Brahmana of the Rig Veda, which goes by the name of Kaushitaki and Shankayana, comprises 30 chapters. Its subject is, on the whole, the same as that of the original part of the Aitareya, but is more expansive, for in its opening chapters it goes through the setting up of the sacred fire, Agni Adhana, the daily morning and evening offering, Agnihotra, the new and whole moon ritual, and the 4-monthly offering. The Soma offering, however, occupies the dominant position even here. The more definite and methodical treatment of the ritual in the Kaushitaki would seem to show that this Brahmana was composed at a later date than the first 5 books of the Aitareya. However, such a conclusion is not altogether borne out by comparing the linguistic data of these 2 works. Professor Weber argues from the occurrence in one passage of Isana and Mahadeva as designations of the god who was later only called Shiva, that the Kaushitaki Brahmana was composed at about the same time as the latest books of the White Yajurveda and those parts of the Atharva Veda and of the Shatapatha Brahmana in which these appellations of the same god are found. The chief human interest of these Brahmanas lies in the many myths and legends which they contain. The longest and most remarkable of those found in the Aitareya is the story of Shunashepa, Dog's Tale, which forms the 3rd chapter of Book 7. The childless king, Harishchandra, vowed that if he should have a son, to offering him to Varuna. When his son Rohita was born, he kept putting off fulfilling his promise. At length, when the boy was grown up, his father, pressed by Varuna, prepared to perform the offering. Rohita escaped to the forest, where he wandered for 6 years while his father was afflicted with dropsy by Varuna. At last, he fell in with a starving Brahmin who consented to sell to him for 100 cows his son, Shunashepa, as a substitute. Varuna agreed, saying, "A Brahmin is worth more than a Kshatriya." Shunashepa was accordingly bound to the stake, and the offering was about to proceed when the victim prayed to various gods in succession as he repeated one verse after the other. The fetters of Varuna fell off, and the dropsical swelling of the king to diminish, till finally Shunashepa was released, and Harishchandra was restored to health again. To the Aitareya Brahmana belongs the Aitareya Aranyaka. It comprises 18 chapters, distributed unequally among 5 books. The last 2 books are composed in the sutra style and are regarded as belonging to the sutra literature. 4 parts can be clearly distinguished in the first 3 books. Book 1 deals with various liturgies of the Soma offering from a purely ritual point of view. The first 3 chapters of Book 2 are theosophical, containing speculations about the world's soul under the names of prana and purusha. It is allied to the Upanishads, some of its more valuable thoughts recurring, occasionally even word for word, in the Kaushitaki Upanishad. The third part comprises the remaining 4 sections of Book 2, which form the regular Aitareya Upanishad. Finally, Book 3 deals with the mystic and allegorical meaning of the 3 principal modes in which the Veda is recited in the Samhita, Pada, and Kramapathas, and of the various letters of the alphabet. To the Kaushitaki Brahmana is attached the Kaushitaki Aranyaka. It comprises 15 chapters. The first 2 correspond to books 1 and 5 of the Aitareya Aranyaka, the 7th and 8th to book 3, while the intervening 4 chapters, 3 to 6, form the Kaushitaki Upanishad. The latter is a long and fascinating Upanishad. It seems not improbable to have been added as an independent treatise to the completed Aranyaka, as it is not always found in the same part of the latter work in the manuscripts. Brahmanas belonging to 2 independent schools of the Samaveda have been preserved, those of the Tandons and the Talavakaras or Jaiminiyas. Though several other works here claim the title of ritual textbooks, only 3 are, in reality, Brahmanas. The Brahmana of the Talavakaras, which primarily unpublished, seems to comprise 5 books. The first 3, unpublished, are mainly concerned with various parts of the sacrificial ceremony. The 4th book, called the Upanishad Brahmana, probably the Brahmana of mystic meanings, besides all kinds of allegories of the Aranyaka order, 2 lists of teachers, a section about the origin of the vital airs, prana, and the Savitri stanza, contains the brief but essential Kena Upanishad. Book 5, entitled Arshaya Brahmana, is a short enumeration of the composers of the Samaveda. To the school of the Tandons belongs the Panchavimsha, 25-fold, also called Tandya or Prada Brahmana, which, as the first name implies, comprises 25 books. It is concerned with the Soma offerings, ranging from the minor offerings to those which lasted 100 days or even several years. Besides many legends, it contains a minute description of offerings performed on the Sarasvati or Drishadvati. Though Kurukshetra is known to it, other geographical data which it contains point to the home of this Brahmana having lain farther east. Noteworthy among its contents are the so-called Vratya stomas, which are offerings meant to enable Aryan but non-Brahmanical Indians to enter the Brahmanical order. A point of interest in this Brahmana is the bitter hostility it displays towards the school of the Kaushitakans. The Shadvimsha Brahmana, though nominally an independent work, is in reality a supplement to the Panchavimsha, of which, as its name implies, it forms the 26th book. The last 6 chapters are called the Adbhuta Brahmana, intended to obviate the evil effects of various extraordinary events or portents. Among such phenomena are mentioned images of the gods when they laugh, cry, sing, dance, perspire, crack, and so forth. The other Brahmana of this school, the Chandogya Brahmana, is only to a slight extent a ritual textbook. It does not deal with the Soma offering at all, but only with ceremonies relating to birth and marriage or prayers addressed to divine beings. These are the contents of only the first 2 lessons of this Brahmana of the Sama theologians. The remaining 8 lessons make up the Chandogya Upanishad. There are 4 other temporary works which, though bearing the name, are not Brahmanas. These are the Samavidana Brahmana, a treatise on the employment of chants for all kinds of superstitious purposes, the Devatadhyaya Brahmana, containing some statements about the deities of the various chants of the Samaveda, the Vamsha Brahmana, which furnishes a genealogy of the teachers of the Samaveda, and finally, the Samhitopanishad, which, like the 3rd book of the Aitareya Aranyaka, treats of how the Veda should be recited. The Brahmanas of the Samaveda is distinguished by the exaggerated and fantastic character of their mystical speculations. A prominent feature in them is the constant identification of various kinds of samans, or chants, with all kinds of terrestrial and celestial objects. They contain much matter that is interesting from a historical point of view. The last 3 sections of Book 3 of the Brahmana, as well as the first 2 books of the Aranyaka, originally belonged to the school of the Kathas, though they have not been preserved as part of the tradition of that school. The different origin of these parts is showed by the absence of the change of Y and V to IY and UV respectively, which otherwise prevails in the Taittiriya Brahmana and Aranyaka. Though the Maitrayani Samhita has no independent Brahmana, its 4th book, as comprising explanations and supplements to the first 3, is a kind of special Brahmana connected with the Samhita and in the manuscripts sometimes forming its 2nd or its 5th book is the Maitrayana, also called Maitrayaniya and Maitri Upanishad. The geographical data of the Shatapatha Brahmana point to the land of the Kuru Panchalas being still the center of Brahmanical culture. Janamejaya is here celebrated as a king of the Kurus and the most renowned Brahmanical teacher of the age, Aruni, is expressly stated to have been a Panchala. By this time, the Brahmanical system had spread to the countries to east of Madhya Desha, to Kosala with its capital, Ayodhya, or Udh, and Vidaha, Tirhut, or northern Behar, with its capital, Mithila. The court of King Janaka of Vidaha was thronged with Brahmins from the Kuru Panchala country. The tournaments of argument held to form a prominent feature in the later books of the Shatapatha Brahmana. The hero of these is Yajnavalkya, who himself, a pupil of Aruni, is regarded as the chief spiritual authority in the Brahmana. Specific passages of the Brahmana render it highly probable that Yajnavalkya was a native of Vidaha, that its leading authority, who thus appears to have belonged to this eastern country, is represented as vanquishing the most distinguished teachers of the West in argument, points to the redaction of the White Yajurveda having taken place in this eastern region. The Shatapatha Brahmana contains reminiscences of the days when the country of Vidaha was not as yet Brahmanism. Thus, Book 1 relates a legend in which 3 stages in the eastward migration of the Aryans can be distinguished. Madhava, the king of Vidaga, the older form of Vidaha, whose family priest was Gautama Rahugana, was at one time on the Sarasvati, Agni Vaishvanara, here typical of Brahmanical culture, thence went, burning along this earth towards the east, followed by Madhava and his priest, till he came to the river Sadanira, probably the modern Gandak. a tributary running into the Ganges near Patna, which flows from the northern mountain, in which he did not turn over. Brahmins did not cross this river in former times, thinking it had not been burnt over by Agni Vaishvanara. The land to the eastward was very uncultivated and marshy, but now many Brahmins are there, and it is highly cultivated, for the Brahmins have caused Agni to taste it through offerings. Madhava, the Vidiga, then said to Agni, "Where am I to abide?" "To the east of this river be thy abode," he replied. The writer adds that this river forms the boundary between the Kosalas, Udh, and the Vidahas, Tirhut. The Vajrasaneyi school of white Yajurveda felt a sense of the superiority of the sacrificial lore which grew up in these eastern countries. Blame is frequently expressed in the Shatapatha Brahmana of the Adhvaryu priests of the Charaka school. The latter is meant as a broad term to embrace the three older schools of the Black Yajurveda, the Kathas, the Kapishtalas, and the Maitrayanias. As Buddhism first obtained a firm footing in Kosala and Vidaha, it is interesting to inquire in what relation to the Shatapatha Brahmana stands to the beginnings of that doctrine. Arhat, Shramana, and Pratibuddha occur here for the first time, but without the technical sense in Buddhistic literature. Again, in the lists of teachers given in the Brahmana, mention is made with a particular frequency of the Gautamas, a family name used by the Shakyas of Kapilavastu, among whom Buddha was born. Specific allusions suggest the beginnings of the Sankhya doctrine, for mention is several times made of a teacher called Asuri, and according to tradition, Asuri is the name of a leading authority for the Sankhya system. If we inquire how far the legends of our Brahmana contain the germs of the later epic tales, we find that there is indeed some slight connection. Janamejaya, the celebrated king of the Kurus in the Mahabharata, is mentioned here for the first time. The Pandus, however, who provided victorious in the epic war, is not to be met within this any more than in the other Brahmanas, and Arjuna, the name of their chief, is still an appellation of Indra. As the epic Arjuna is a son of Indra, his origin is doubtless to be traced to this epithet of Indra. Janaka, the famous king of Vidaha, is probably identical to the father of Sita, the heroine of the Ramayana. Of two legends that furnished the classical poet Kalidasa with the plots of two of his most famous dramas, one is told and the other is at least alluded to. The story of the love and separation of Pururavas and Urvashi, already dimly shadowed forth in a hymn of the Rig Veda, is here related with much more fullness, while Bharata, son of Dukshanta and of the nymph Shakuntala, also appears on the scene of this Brahmana. A most exciting legend which reappears in the Mahabharata, that of the deluge, is here told for the first time in Indian literature, though it seems to be alluded in the Atharva Veda, while it is known even to the Avesta. This myth is regarded as derived from a Semitic source. It tells how Manu once possessed a small fish, which asked him to rear it, and promised to save him from the coming flood. Having built a ship following the fish's advice, he entered it when the deluge arose and was finally guided to the northern mountain by the fish, to whose horn he had tied his ship. Manu subsequently became the progenitor of humanity through his daughter. The Shatapatha Brahmana is thus a mine of essential data and noteworthy narratives. Internal evidence shows it to belong to a late period of the Brahmana age. Its style, as compared with the earlier works of the same class, displays some progress towards facility and clearness. Its treatment of the sacrificial ceremonial, which is essentially the same in the Brahmana portions of the Black Yajurveda, is throughout more lucid and systematic. On the theosophic side, too, we find the idea of unity in the universe more fully developed than in any other Brahmana work, while its Upanishad is the most refined product of Vedic philosophy. To the Atharva Veda is attached the Gopatha Brahmana, though it has no particular connection with that Samhita. This Brahmana comprises 2 books, the first containing 5 chapters, the second 6. Both parts are very late, for they were composed after the Vaitana Sutra and practically with no Atharvan tradition. The matter of the former half, while not corresponding or following the order of the offering in any ritual text, is to a large extent original, the rest being borrowed from books 11 and 12 of the Shatapatha Brahmana, besides a few passages from the Aitareya. The primary motive of this portion is the glorification of the Atharva Veda and the 4th or Brahman priest. The mention of the god Shiva points to its belonging to the post-Vedic rather than to the Brahmana period. It presupposes the Atharva Veda in 20 books and containing grammatical matters of a very advanced type are other signs of lateness. The latter half bears more the stamp of a regular Brahmana, being a moderately connected account of the ritual in the sacrificial order of the Vaitana Shrauta Sutra. But it is primarily a compilation. The ordinary historical relation of Brahmana and Sutra is here reversed, the second book of the Gopatha Brahmana being based on the Vaitana Sutra, which stands to it practically in the relation of a Samhita. About 2/3 of its matter has already been taken from older texts. The Aitareya and the Kaushitaki Brahmanas have been chiefly exploited, and to a less extent, the Maitrayani and Taittiriya Samhitas. A few passages are derived from the Shatapatha and even the Panchavimsha Brahmana. Though the Upanishads form a part of the Brahmanas, being a continuation of their speculative side, Jnana Kanda, they represent a new religion, which is in virtual opposition to the ritual or practical side, Karma Kanda. Their aim is no longer the obtainment of earthly happiness and afterwards bliss in the abode of Yama by sacrificing correctly to the gods, but release from mundane existence by the absorption of the individual soul in the world soul through correct knowledge. Here, therefore, the sacrificial ceremonial has become useless and speculative knowledge all important. The essential theme of the Upanishads is the nature of the world soul. Their conception represents the last stage in the development from the world man, Purusha, of the Rig Veda to the world soul, Atman. From the personal creator, Prajapati, to the impersonal source of all being, Brahma. Atman in the Rig Veda means only breath. Wind, for instance, is spoken of as the Atman of Varuna. In the Brahmanas, it came to mean soul or self, in one of their speculations, identified with the gods, and so an Atman comes to be attributed to the universe. In one of the later books of the Shatapatha Brahmana, this Atman, which has already arrived at high abstraction, is said to pervade this universe. Brahma, neuter, in the Rig Veda, signified nothing more than prayer or devotion. Having a long, subsequent history, this word is a very epitome of the evolution of religious thought in India. Even in the oldest Brahmanas, it has a sense of universal holiness manifested in prayer, priest, and offers. In these Upanishads, it is the religious principle that animates nature. These two conceptions, Atman and Brahma, are commonly treated as synonymous in the Upanishads. Brahma, the older term, represents the cosmical principle which pervades the universe. Atman, the psychical principle, manifested in man, and the latter, as the known, is used to explain the former as the unknown. The more personal Prajapati is taken in the Upanishads by the Atman as a creative power. Thus, the Brihadaranyaka relates that in the beginning, the Atman, or the Brahma, was in this universe. It was afraid in its loneliness and felt no pleasure. Designing a second being, it became man and woman, whence humans were produced. It then similarly produced male and female animals, finally creating water, fire, the gods, and so forth. The author then proceeds in a more exalted strain. It, the Atman, is here, all-pervading down to the tips of the nails. One does not see it any more than a razor hidden in its case or fire in its receptacle. For it does not appear as a whole. When it breathes, it is called breath. When it speaks, voice. When it hears, ear. When it thinks, mind. These are merely the names of its activities. He who worships the one or the other of these has not correct knowledge. One should worship it as the self, for in it all these become one. Breath, etc., become one. In one of the later Upanishads, Shvetashvatara, the notion so prominent in the later Vedanta system that the material world is an illusion, Maya, is first met with. The world is explained here as an illusion produced by Brahma as a conjurer, Mayan. This notion is, however, inherent even in the oldest Upanishads. It is virtually identical with the teaching of Plato that the things of experience are only the shadow of the real things, and with the teaching of Kant, they are only phenomena of the thing. The great fundamental doctrine of the Upanishads is the identity of the individual Atman with the world Atman. It is most forcibly expressed in a frequently repeated sentence of the Chandogya Upanishad 8-16. This entire world comprises it. That is the real. That is the soul. That art thou, O Shvetaketu. And that famous formula, that art thou, Tat Twamasi. All the teachings of the Upanishads are summed up. The Brihadaranyaka 6 expresses the same doctrine thus: whoever knows this, I am Brahma, Aham Brahma Asmi, becomes the all. Even the gods cannot prevent him from becoming it, for he becomes their self, Atman. This identity was already recognized in the Shatapatha Brahmana. Even as the smallest granule of Malay, so is this golden Purusha in the heart. That self of the spirit is my self. On passing from hence, I shall obtain that self. We find everywhere in these treatises a restless striving to grasp the true nature of the pantheistic self, now through one metaphor, now through another. Thus the wise Yajnavalkya, about to renounce the world and retire to the forest, replies to the question of his wife, Maitreyi, with the words, as a lump of salt thrown into the water would dissolve and could not be taken out again, While the water, wherever tasted, would be salt, so is this great being endless, unlimited, simply compacted of cognition. Arising out of these elements, it disappears again in them. After death, there is no consciousness. For, as he further explains, when the duality on which consciousness is based disappears, consciousness must cease. In another passage of the same Upanishad, we read, "Just as the spider goes out of itself by its thread, as tiny sparks leap out of the fire, so from the Atman issue all vital airs, all worlds, all gods, all beings." Here again is a stanza from the Mundaka. As rivers flow and disappear at last, in ocean's waters, name and form renouncing, so too the sage, released from name and form, is merged in the divine and highest spirit. In a passage of the Brihadaranyaka, Yajnavalkya describes the Atman as the inner guide, Antaryaman, who is in all beings, different from all beings, who guides all beings within, that is, thyself, the inward guide, immortal. The same Upanishad contains an exciting conversation in which King Ajatashatru of Kashi, Benares, instructs the Brahman Balaki Gargya that Brahma is not the spirit, Purusha, which is in sun, moon, wind, and other natural phenomena, or even in the waking soul, Atman, but is the dreaming soul, which is creative, assuming any form at pleasure, or in the highest state, the soul in dreamless sleep, for here all phenomena have disappeared. This is the first and the last condition of Brahma, in which no world exists, all material existence being only the phantasms of the dreaming world soul. Of somewhat similar purport is a passage of the Chandogya, where Prajapati is represented as teaching the Atman in 3 stages. The soul in the body as reflected in a mirror or water is first identified with Brahma, then the dreaming soul, and lastly, the soul in dreamless sleep. How accepted the pantheistic theory must have become by the time the disputations at King Janaka's court took place is shown by the form in which questions are put. Thus 2 different sages in the Brihadaranyaka successively ask Yajnavalkya in the exact words, "Explain to us the Brahma which is manifest and not hidden, the Atman that dwells in everything." The doctrine that proper knowledge led to supreme bliss by the absorption of the individual soul in Brahma went hand in hand with the theory of transmigration, samsara. That theory is developed in the oldest Upanishads. It must have been firmly established by the time Buddhism arose, for Buddha accepted it without question. Its earliest form is found in the Shatapatha Brahmana, where being born again after death and dying repeatedly is coupled with retribution. Thus it is here said that those who have the correct knowledge and perform an inevitable offering are born again after death for immortality, while those who have not such knowledge and do not perform this offering are reborn again and again, becoming the prey of death. The notion here does not go beyond repeated births and deaths in the next world. It is transformed to the doctrine of transmigration in the Upanishads by supposing rebirth in this world. In the Brihadaranyaka, we further meet with the beginnings of the doctrine of karma, or action, which regulates the new birth and makes it depend on a man's deeds. When the body returns to the elements, nothing of the individuality is here set to remain but the karma according to which a man becomes good or bad. This is perhaps the germ of the Buddhistic doctrine, which, though denying the existence of soul altogether, allows karma to continue after death and to determine the next birth. The most important and detailed account of the theory of transmigration which we possess from Vedic times is supplied by the Chandogya Upanishad. The forest ascetic, possessed of knowledge and faith, it is here said, after death, enters the Devayana, the path of the gods, which leads to absorption in Brahma, while the householder who has performed an offering and good works goes by the Pitriyana, or path of the fathers, to the moon, where he remains till the consequences of his actions are exhausted. He then returns to earth, being first born again as a plant, and afterward as a man of one of the 3 highest castes. Here we have double retribution, first in the next world, then by transmigration in this. The former is a survival of the old Vedic beliefs about the future life. The wicked are born again as outcasts, chandalas, dogs, or swine. The account of the Brihadaranyaka is similar. Those who have proper knowledge and faith pass through the world of the gods and the sun to the world of Brahma, and whence there is no return. Those who practice offering and good works pass through the world of the fathers to the moon, whence they return to earth, being born again as men. Others become birds, beasts, and reptiles. The view of the Kaushitaki Upanishad is different. Here, all who die go to the moon, whence some go by the path of the fathers to Brahma, while others return to various forms of earthly existence, ranging from man to worm, according to their work's quality, the degree of their knowledge. The Kathaka, one of the most remarkable and beautiful of the Upanishads, treats the question of life after death as a legend. Nachiketas, a young Brahman, visits the realm of Yama, who offers him the choice of 3 boons. For the third, he chooses the answer to whether man exists after death or no. Death replies, "Even the gods have doubted about this. It is a subtle point. Choose another boon." After vain efforts to evade the question by offering Nachiketas earthly power and riches, Yama finally yields to his persistence and reveals the secret. Life and death, he explains, are only different phases of development. Proper knowledge, which consists in recognizing the identity of the individual soul with the world soul, raises its possessor beyond the reach of death. When every passion vanishes that nestles in the human heart, then man gains immortality, then Brahma is obtained by him. The story of the temptation of Nachiketas to choose the goods of this world in preference to the highest knowledge is probably the prototype for the legend of the temptation of Buddha by Mara or death. Both by resisting the temptation obtain enlightenment. It must not, of course, be supposed that the Upanishads, either as a whole or individually, offer a complete and consistent conception of the world, logically developed. Instead, they are a mixture of half-poetical, half-philosophical fancies, dialogues, and disputations dealing tentatively with metaphysical questions. Their speculations were only later reduced to a system in the Vedanta philosophy. The earliest of them can hardly be dated later than about 600 BC, since some essential doctrines first met within them are presupposed by Buddhism. They may be divided chronologically on internal evidence into 4 classes, the oldest group consisting in chronological order of the Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, Taittiriya, Aitareya, Kaushitaki is written in prose, which still suffers from the awkwardness of the Brahmana style. A transition is formed by the Kena, which is partly in verse and partly in prose, to a decidedly later class, the Kathaka, Isha, Shweta-shwatara, Mundaka, Mahanarayana, which are metrical and in which the Upanishad doctrine is no longer developing but has become fixed. These are more attractive from the literary point of view. Even those of the older class gain a peculiar charm from their liveliness, enthusiasm, and freedom from pedantry, while their language often rises to the level of eloquence. The third class, comprising the Prashna, Maitrayaniya, and Mandukya, reverts to the use of prose, however, of a much less archaic type than that of the first class, and approaches that of classical Sanskrit writers. The fourth class comprises the later Atharvan Upanishads, some of which are composed in prose, others in verse. The Aitareya, one of the shortest of the Upanishads, extending to only about 4 pages, comprises 3 chapters. The first represents the world as creating the Atman, also called Brahma, and man as its highest manifestation. It is based on the Purusha hymn of the Rig Veda, but the primeval man is in the Upanishad described as having been produced by the Atman from the waters which it created. The Atman is here said to occupy 3 abodes in man, the senses, mind, and heart, respectively corresponding to the 3 conditions of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. The second chapter treats the threefold birth of the Atman, the end of transmigration as salvation, which is represented as an immortal existence in heaven. The last chapter, dealing with the Atman, states that consciousness, prajna, is Brahma. The Kaushitaki Upanishad is a treatise of considerable length, divided into 4 chapters. The first deals with the 2 paths traversed by souls after death, connected with transmigration. The second with prana, or life, as a symbol of the Atman. The last 2, while discussing the doctrine of Brahma, contain a disquisition about the dependence of the objects of sense on the organs of sense, and the latter on unconscious life, prana, and conscious life, prajnatma. Therefore, those who aim at redeeming knowledge are admonished not to seek after objects or subjective faculties, but only the subject of cognition and action, which is described with much power as the highest God and as the Atman within us. The Upanishads of the Samaveda start from the Saman or chant, just as those of the Rig Veda from the Uktha or hymn recited by the Hotri priest, in order, by interpreting it allegorically, to arrive at a knowledge of the Atman or Brahma. The Upanishads have the same basis. Moreover, primarily treated similarly, it concludes that the various Vedic schools found a standard body of oral tradition shaped into dogmatic texts, books, or Upanishads in their way. Thus, the Chandogya, which is equal in importance and only slightly inferior in extent to the Brihadaranyaka, bears clear traces like the latter of comprising collections of floating materials. Each of its 8 chapters forms an independent whole, followed by supplementary pieces, often but slightly connected with the primary subject. The first 2 chapters comprise mystical interpretations of the Saman and its top part, called Udgitha, loud song. A supplement to the second chapter treats, among other subjects, of the origin of the syllable Om and the 3 stages of religious life. those of the Brahman pupil, the householder, and the ascetic, to which later the religious mendicant was added as a fourth. The third chapter in the major deals with Brahma as the sun of the universe, the natural sun being its manifestation. The infinite Brahma is further described as a dwelling, whole and undivided, in the heart of man. How Brahma is to be attained is then described, and the great fundamental dogma of the identity of Brahma and the Atman, or as we might say, of God and soul, is declared. The chapter concludes with a myth that forms a connecting link between the cosmogonic conceptions of the Rig Veda and those of the law book of Manu. The fourth chapter, containing discussions about wind, breath, and other phenomena connected with Brahma, also teaches how the soul makes its way to Brahma after death. The various Upanishads of the Black Yajur Veda all bear the stamp of lateness. The Maitrayana is a prose work of considerable extent in which occasional stanzas are interspersed. It comprises 7 chapters, the 7th and the concluding 8th sections of the 6th forming a supplement. That it keeps the orthographical and euphonic peculiarities of the Maitrayana school gives this Upanishad an aged appearance. Its many quotations from other Upanishads, the occurrence of several late words, the developed Sankhya doctrine presupposed by it, and distinct references to anti-Vedic heretical schools combine to render the late character of this work undoubted. It is in fact a summing up of the old Upanishad doctrines with an admixture of ideas derived from the Sankhya system and Buddhism. The main body of the treatise expounds the nature of the Atman, communicated to King Brihadratha of the race Avikshwaku, probably identical with the king of that name mentioned in the Ramayana, who declaims at some length on the misery and transitoriness of earthly existence. Though pessimism is not unknown to the old Upanishads, it is much more pronounced here, doubtless in consequence of Sankhya and Buddhistic influence. The subject is treated as 3 questions. The first, how the Atman enters the body, is that Prajapati enters in the form of the 5 vital breaths of air to animate the lifeless bodies created by him. The second question is, how does the Supreme Soul become the individual soul, Buddhatman? This is answered instead following the Sankhya than the Vedanta doctrine. Overcome by the 3 qualities of matter, Prakriti, the Atman, forgetting its fundamental nature, becomes involved in self-consciousness and transmigration. The third question is, how is deliverance from this state of misery possible? This is answered in conformity with neither Vedanta nor Sankhya doctrine, but in a reactionary spirit. Only those who observe the old requirements of Brahmanism, the rules of caste, and the religious orders, ashramas, are declared capable of attaining salvation by knowledge, penance, and meditation on Brahma. The chief gods, the triad of the Brahmana period, fire, wind, sun, the 3 abstractions, time, breath, food, and the 3 popular gods, Brahma, Rudra, i.e. Shiva, and Vishnu, are explained as manifestations of Brahma. The rest of this Upanishad is supplementary but contains several passages of considerable interest. We have here a cosmogonic myth, like those of the Brahmanas, in which the 3 qualities of matter, tamas, rajas, sattva, are connected with Rudra, Brahma, and Vishnu, and which is in other respects very remarkable as a connecting link between the philosophy of the Rig Veda and the later Sankhya system. The sun is further represented as the external and prana, breath, as the internal symbol of the Atman, their worship being recommended using the sacred syllable Om, the three utterances, Vyahritis, Bur, Bhuva, Swar, and the famous Savitri stanza. To attain Brahma, we find a yoga recommendation, or the ascetic practices leading to mental concentration and bordering on trance. The information we here receive of these practices is still undeveloped compared with the later system. Besides the three conditions of Brahma, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, mention is fourth, Turiya, and highest stage. The Upanishad concludes with the declaration that the Atman entered the world of duality because it wished to taste both truth and illusion. Older than Maitrayana, which borrows from them, are two other Upanishads of the Black Yajurveda, the Kathaka and the Shvetashvatara. The former contains some 120 and the latter some 110 stanzas. The Kathaka deals with the legend of Nachiketas, which is told in the Kathaka portion of the Taittiriya Brahmana, and a knowledge of which it presupposes. This is showed because it begins with the exact words as the Brahmana story. The treatise appears to have consisted originally of the first only of its 2 chapters. The second, with its more developed notions about yoga and its much more pronounced view as to the unreality of phenomena, looks like a later addition. The first contains an introductory narrative, an account of the Atman, its embodiment, and eventual return using yoga. The second chapter, though less well arranged on the whole, corresponds in matter with the first. Its fourth section, while discussing the Atman, identifies both soul, Purusha, and matter, Prakriti, with it. The fifth section deals with the manifestation of the Atman in the world, and especially in man, how it at the same time remains outside them in its complete integrity and is not affected by the suffering of living beings, is strikingly illustrated by the analogy of both light and air, which pervade space and yet embrace every object, and of the sun, the eye of the universe, which remains free from the blemishes of all other eyes outside of it. In the last section, yoga is taught to be the means of attaining the highest goal. The gradation of mental faculties here described is of great interest for the history of the Sankhya and Yoga systems. An unconscious contradiction runs through this discussion, since though the Atman is regarded as the all-in-all, a sharp contrast is drawn between soul and matter. It is the contradiction between the later Vedanta and the Sankhya Yoga systems of philosophy. According to its statement, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad derives its name from an individual author, and the tradition which attributes it to one school of the Black Yajurveda hardly seems to have a sufficient foundation. Its confusing arrangement, the irregularities and arbitrary changes of its meters, the number of interpolated quotations it contains, make the assumption likely that the work in its present form is not the work of a single author. In its present form, it is certainly later than the Kathaka, since it contains several passages which must be referred to the work, besides many stanzas borrowed from it, with or without variation. Its lateness is further shown by the developed theory of yoga which it contains, besides the more or less definite form in which it exhibits various Vedanta doctrines, either unknown to or only foreshadowed in the earlier Upanishads. Among these may be mentioned the world's destruction by Brahma at the end of a cosmic age, Kalpa, and its periodic renewal out of Brahma, and especially the explanation of the world as an illusion, Maya, produced by Brahma. The author shows a strange predilection for the personified forms of Brahma as Savitri, Ashana, or Rudra. Though Shiva has not yet become the name of Rudra, its frequent use as an adjective connected with the latter shows it is in becoming fixed as the proper name of the highest god. In this Upanishad, we meet several terms and fundamental notions of the Sankhya, though the point of view is thoroughly Vedantist. Matter, Prakriti, represented as an illusion produced by Brahma. The next chapter deals with the Atman and its manifestations, Purusha and Prana. Like the universe, the first chapter deals with Prana, breath, as a symbol of the soul, and then with the creation of the world out of the Atman or Brahma, insisting on the dependence of all existence on the Supreme Soul, which appears in every individual as a self. The polemical attitude adopted against the worship of the gods is characteristic, showing that the passage belongs to an early period in which the doctrine of the superiority of the Atman to the gods was still asserting itself. The second part of the Upanishad comprises 4 philosophical discussions in which Yajnavalkya is the chief speaker. The first is an excellent disputation in which the sage proves his advantage to 9 successive interlocutors. One of the most exciting conclusions here is that Brahma is theoretically unknowable but can be comprehended practically. The second discourse is a dialogue between King Janaka and Yajnavalkya, in which the latter shows the untenableness of 6 definitions set up by other teachers as to Brahma. For instance, it is identical with breath or mind. He finally declares that the Atman can only be described negatively, intangible, indestructible, independent, immovable. The third discourse, IV 3-4, is another dialogue between Janaka and Yajnavalkya. It presents a picture of the soul in the conditions of waking, dreaming, deep sleep, dying, transmigration, and salvation. For a wealth of illustration, the fervor of conviction, beauty, and elevation of thought, this piece is unequaled in the Upanishads or any other work of Indian literature. Its literary effect is heightened by the many stanzas with which it is interspersed. There are, however, doubtless later additions. The dreaming soul is thus described, leaving its lower nest in breath's protection, and upward from that nest, immortal, soaring. Wherever it lists, it roves about, immortal. The golden-pinioned, only swan of spirit, it roves in dream, condition up and downward. Divinely many shapes and forms are assuming. Then follows an account of the dreamless state of the soul. As a falcon or an eagle, having flown about in the air, exhausted, folds together its wings and prepares to alight, so that the spirit hastes to that condition in which, asleep, it feels no desire and sees no dream. This is its basic form, in which it rises above desire, is free from evil and without fear. For as one embraced by a beloved woman was not of anything without or within, so also the soul embraced by the cognitional self wots not of anything without or within. Concerning the souls of those who are not saved, The writer's view appears to be that after death, they enter a new body immediately and with no intervening retribution in the other world, in exact accordance with their intellectual and moral quality. When it has reached the point of a leaf, a caterpillar makes a new beginning and draws itself across, so the soul, after casting off the body and letting go of ignorance, makes a new beginning and draws itself across, as a goldsmith takes the material of an image and hammers out of it another newer and more beautiful form, so also the soul, after casting off the body and letting go of ignorance, creates for itself another newer and more beautiful form, either that of the fathers, or the Gandharvas, or the gods, or Prajapati, or Brahma, or other beings. 4, 4, 4. The vital heirs of him who is saved, who know himself to be identical with Brahma, do not depart, for he is absorbed in Brahma and is Brahma. Like a serpent's skin, dead and cast off, lies upon an anthill, so his body then lies. But that which is bodiless and immortal, the life, is pure Brahma, is pure light. The fourth discourse is a dialogue between Yajnavalkya and his wife, Maitreyi, before the former, about to renounce the world, retires to the solitude of the forest. There are several indications that it is a secondary recension of the same conversation in a previous chapter. The first chapter of the third, or supplementary part, comprises 15 sections, which are often relatively short, are primarily unconnected, and appear very different. However, the second chapter forms a long and vital treatise, identical with that found in the Chandogya on the doctrine of transmigration. The views expressed here are so much at variance with those of Yajnavalkya that this text must have originated in another Vedic school and is loosely attached to this Upanishad because of its peculiar important contents. The preceding and following sections connected with it and found in the Chandogya must have been added simultaneously. The longest Upanishad is attached to the White Yajurveda, and one of the shortest, comprising only 18 stanzas. This is the Isha, which is the so-called from its initial word, though forming the last chapter of the Vajrasaneyi Samhita. It belongs to a relatively late period. It is about contemporaneous with the latest parts of the Brihadranyaka, is more developed in many points than the Kathaka, but seems to be older than the Shvetashvatara. Its leading motives is to contrast him who knows himself to be the same as Atman with him who does not possess the proper knowledge. It affords an excellent survey of the fundamental doctrines of the Vedanta philosophy. Upanishad's large and indefinite number is attributed to the Atharva Veda, but the most authoritative list recognizes 27 altogether. They are primarily of very late origin, being post-Vedic, and all but 3 contemporaneous with the Puranas. One of them is a Mohammedan treatise entitled the Ala Upanishad. The older Upanishads which belong to the first 3 Vedas were, with a few exceptions, like the Shvetashvatara, the dogmatic textbooks of actual Vedic schools, and received their names from those schools, being connected with and supplementary to the ritual Brahmanas. The Upanishads of the Atharva Veda are, with few exceptions like the Mandukya and the Jabala, no longer connected with Vedic schools, but derive their names from their subject matter or some other circumstance. They appear mostly to represent the views of theosophic, mystic, ascetic, or sectarian associations who wished to have a Upanishad of their own, in imitation of the old Vedic schools. They became attached to the Atharva Veda, not from any internal connection, but partly because the followers of the Atharva Veda desired to become possessed of dogmatic textbooks of their own, and partly because the fourth Veda was not protected from the intrusion of foreign elements by the watchfulness of religious guilds like the old Vedic schools. The fundamental doctrine common to all the Upanishads of the Atharva Veda is developed in various directions. They may accordingly be divided into 4 categories that run chronologically parallel, each containing relatively old and late productions, as directly investigating the Atman. The first group has a scope similar to that of the Upanishads of the other Vedas and goes no further than the latter in developing its central thesis. The next group, taking the fundamental doctrine for granted, treats absorption in the Atman through ascetic meditation, yoga, based on the parts of the sacred syllable, Om. These Upanishads are almost without expectation, composed in verse, and are pretty short, consisting on an average of about 20 stanzas. In the third category, the life of the religious mendicant, sannyasin, is recommended and described as a practical consequence of the Upanishad doctrine. These Upanishads are short, but are written in prose, though with an admixture of verse. The last group is sectarian, interpreting the popular gods, Shiva, under various names, such as Isana, Ishana, Maheshwara, Mahadeva, and Vishnu as Narayana and Nrisimha, or man-lion, as personifications of the Atman. The different avatars of Vishnu are here regarded as human manifestations of the Atman. The oldest and most important of these Atharvan Upanishads, as representing the Vedanta doctrine most faithfully, are the Mundaka, the Prashna, and to a minor degree, the Mandukya. The first 2 come nearest to the Upanishads of the older Vedas and are much quoted by Badarayana and Shankara, the eminent authorities of the later Vedanta philosophy. They are the only original and legitimate Upanishads of the Atharva. The Mundaka derives its name from being the Upanishad of the tonsure, Munda, an association of ascetics who shaved their heads as the Buddhist monks did later. It is one of the most popular of the Upanishads, not owing to the originality of its contents, which are primarily derived from older texts, but owing to the purity with which it reproduces the old Vedanta doctrine, the beauty of the stanzas in which it is composed. It presupposes, above all, the Chandogya Upanishad, and probably the Brihadaranyaka, the Taittiriya, and the Kathaka, having several essential passages in common with the Shvetashvatara and the Brihanarayana of the Black Yajurveda. It probably belongs to the same epoch, coming between the 2 in order of time. It comprises 3 parts, speaking deal respectively with the preparations for the knowledge of Brahma, the doctrine of Brahma, and the way to Brahma. The Prashna Upanishad, written in prose and belonging to the Pipalada recension of the Atharva Veda, is so called because it treats, as questions, Prashna, addressed by 6 students of Brahma to the sage Pipalada, 6 main points of the Vedanta doctrine. These questions concern the origin of matter and life, prana, from Prajapati, the superiority of life, prana, above the other vital powers, the nature and divisions of the vital powers, dreaming and dreamless sleep, a meditation on the syllable Om and the 16 parts of man. The Mandukya is concise prose Upanishad, which would hardly fill 2 pages of the present book, though bearing the name of a half-forgotten school of the Rig Veda. It is reckoned among the Upanishads of the Atharva Veda. It must date from a considerably later time than the prose Upanishads of the 3 older Vedas, with the unmethodical treatment and prolixity of its precision and conciseness in marked contrast. It has many points of contact with the Maitrayana Upanishad, to which it seems to be posterior. It appears, however, to be older than the rest of the treatises, which form the 4th class of the Upanishads of the Atharva Veda. Thus, it distinguishes only 3 more in the syllable Om, and not yet 3.5. The fundamental idea of this Upanishad is that the sacred syllable expresses the universe. Remarkably, Shankara does not quote this work. It not only exercised a significant influence on several Upanishads of the Atharva Veda, but was used more than any other Upanishad by the author of the well-known later epitome of the Vedanta doctrine, the Vedanta Sara. It is, however, chiefly crucial as having given rise to one of the most remarkable products of Indian philosophy, the Karika of Gaudapada. This work comprises over 200 stanzas, divided into 4 parts, the first of which includes the Mandukya Upanishad. The esteem in which the Karika was held is showed because its parts are reckoned as 4 Upanishads. There is much probability in the assumption that its author is identical with Gaudapada, the teacher of Govinda, whose pupil was the great Vedantist commentator, Shankara, 800 AD. The latter's point of view is the same essence as that of the author of the Karika, and many of the thoughts and figures that appear in the earlier work are in everyday use in Shankara's commentaries. Shankara may be said to have reduced the doctrines of Gaudapada to a system, as did Plato those of Parmenides. Indeed, the 2 leading ideas which pervade the Indian poem, that there is no duality, Advaita, and no becoming, Ajadi, are, as Professor Deussen points out, identical with those of the Greek philosopher. The first part of the Karika is practically a metrical paraphrase of the Mandukya Upanishad. Peculiar to it is the statement that the world is not an illusion or a development in any sense, but the very nature or essence, svabhava, of Brahma, just as the rays, which are all the same, i.e., light, are not different from the sun. The rest of the poem is independent of the Upanishad and goes far beyond its doctrines. The second part has the particular title of Vaitatya, or the falseness of the doctrine of reality. Just as a rope is in the dark mistaken for a snake, so the Atman, in the darkness of ignorance, is mistaken for the world. Every attempt to imagine the Atman under empirical forms is futile, for everyone's idea of it depends on his experience of the world. The third part is entitled Advaita, non-duality, the identity of the Supreme Soul, Atman, with the individual soul, Jiva, is illustrated by comparison with space, and that part of it is contained in a jar. Arguing against the theory of Genesis and plurality, the poet lays down the axiom that nothing can become different from its nature. The production of the existent, sato janma, is impossible, for that would be produced which already exists. The non-existent, asato janma, production is also impossible, for the non-existent is never produced, any more than the son of a barren woman. The last part is entitled Alada Shanti, or Extinction of the Firebrand Circle, so called from an ingenious comparison made to explain how plurality and genesis seem to exist in the world. If a stick that is glowing at one end is waved about, fiery lines or circles are produced without adding to or issuing from the single burning point. The fiery line or circle exists only in the consciousness, Vijnana. So too, the many phenomena of the world are merely the vibrations of the consciousness, which is one. Ryan Mugen once noted an extraordinary paradox in Indian history. On the one hand, we had the largest Bronze Age civilization in the world, the Sindhu-Sarasvati civilization, SSC. It was many times larger in its geographical extent than contemporary Mesopotamia and Egypt put together. It had a population estimated at around 5 million. That number hovered anywhere around 20% of humanity in 2000 BC. Nevertheless, although this massiveness of its Praja and Samrajya, the ruins of the Sindhu and Sarasvati appear empty. Their uncracked aksharas appear hollow and silent. They have nothing to tell us who they were or what happened to them despite their greatness. The Vedic corpus, its massive scale, its literary evolution, its philosophical, mathematical, and astronomical content, and its progression are unrivaled in the ancient world. On the other hand, we also have the most extensive and most sophisticated literature from the Bronze Age. It describes excellent kingdoms, trade, chariots, elaborate fire altars, technological innovations, astronomy, standardized units of measurement, seafaring, and agriculture, and so on. Nevertheless, there is nothing in the archaeological record to account for such an advanced civilization, certainly not if the archaeologists refuse to look.